Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started here shortly. My name is Leah, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Fayetteville Public Library, and welcome to those watching through live stream as well. Before you leave today, please take a moment to fill out the evaluations that we've left for you. Those help us to plan for future programs, and we do have some resources we put together on the table as well if you want to check those out before you go. We're so glad to partner with the Northwest Arkansas Beekeepers Association for this series of classes. The Northwest Arkansas Beekeepers Association promotes the benefits of bees and beekeeping in Northwest Arkansas, whether you are involved in a backyard garden or a large-scale agricultural operation. With over 225 members, the association has grown to become one of Arkansas's largest regional clubs for beekeeping. And with that, I will turn things over to Jay Davidson. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. We really appreciate the partnership. There's a little table here on library information, so please stop by on your way out. Also, if you haven't noticed the refreshments on the back, please help yourself. If you are missing pen and/or paper, we do have some of those available back here as well. And tonight we have a number of different handouts at the table outside, so if you didn't get any when you came in, be sure and stop by on your way out. So without too much ado, we will jump into tonight's agenda. We're going to talk about installing new bees. John's going to walk us through a little bit about hive management, winter prep, inspections. I'm going to give you a little quick rundown on the good stuff, a little honey extraction. We're going to talk a little bit about our mentoring program and the importance of finding a mentor as you embark on your journey, and then we're going to shut her down. I do put this note up here. We do need to be out of the library at 7:45. I know some of us get chatty out here, so we'll be chatty and heading for the door if we can. The library does need to be have all people out of here and accounted for by 8 o'clock, so helps if we can chop, get out of their way. You know where you are. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Earl Rowe, and he's going to take us through new bees. You're on.
Okay, I get the presentation of one of the most exciting days of your life. You've been wanting bees, and you finally get them. And then you want to know what to do with them. And there's a variety of methods of obtaining them. You can buy what's called a package bee. Let's see. Yeah, that's a package right there. A nucleus hive, which would be this right here, or a complete hive. Each of them has advantages and disadvantages. In the transportation, they need to come in where they have plenty of airflow, where the temperature doesn't go up and down too much, and that they are secure. And we'll start with the nucleus hive. It's really a miniature hive. You know, you'll have 2 or 3 or 4 boxes of bees. But when they make a nucleus hive, they take usually it's 5 frames. It'll include frames of brood, pollen, and honey. Should have a laying queen. Sometimes they'll have queen cells that they put in there. But when you get your nucleus or your nuke, she should be laying. You should be able to see eggs in there, because if you don't have a queen, you don't have a hive. You know, it's as simple as that. So that's one of the first things you want to check. And if you remember when we talked, if you were here last time, do you have to find the queen? What do you have to find? If you find eggs, you've got a queen. She was there in the last 3 days. There will be 2 or 3 frames of brood, and you remember how I told you I wasn't going to have a vocabulary test last time I was up here? And brood are the young, you know, that are on the frame, and there's a cap brood, They go from the eggs to the larva to the brood stage, and they cap them. There should be 2 to 3 frames of brood. That doesn't mean the whole frame is full of brood, but it should be 2 or 3 frames that are pretty full of brood. One frame of stores, and that's pollen and honey and nectar. 1 or 2 empty frames. You don't want to get too many that's got 2 empty frames, but do you understand that the person that's putting these nukes together may have 100 of them out there in his yard? And if he allows them to get too full, then they'll swarm and leave him. So he wants to have a frame in there for them to grow into, so that's what the empty frame is there for. The new laying queen has been introduced, or queen cells have added. Confirm that she is laying before you buy the box. Package bees. This is the second way, and this is a really entertaining way because you can get these through the mail. You can order these, and you know how the post office doesn't ever want to open up early? And they don't want to see you until they're ready to. They will call you that morning and tell you that they are ready at 6:30 in the morning or whatever time they get there. And these will usually be sitting out back of the post office. They won't actually be inside. But they'll be ready for you. And it's 3 pounds of bees. And this says 3 pounds. You can buy 2 pounds. You can buy 4 pounds. You can buy 5 pounds. But the average is 3 pounds of bees. And there is no guarantee that any bee in there is related to any other bee in that box. They simply take a bunch of bees at a location and they dump them together with a scale below it. And so it's just a whole bunch of bees that gets thrown together. It's got a can of sugar syrup. I'm sorry, let me back up here. Got a can of sugar syrup that sits right up here underneath the lid. And it's got a laying queen in a cage that is usually attached to the sugar thing, right to the side of it or right up in the top of the box. And you remember the queen gives out pheromones? The smell that makes everybody smell the same and that lets you know that there's bees coming in that aren't part of your hive. Well, so even though these bees have no family relationship, by the time they get there, they're starting to obtain one because they all smell like her. If you want to see something interesting, you should get on YouTube and watch them as they take all of these bees and dump them into a box. And Jay Davidson he and I were talking, and I hadn't realized we were here on the same day. I'd say 8 or 10 years ago, we were here, and they brought like 600 boxes of bees on a trailer up here. And it started pouring down rain. They're coming from Tennessee. They pulled over an underpass, and let the rain pass. They came up here. But what you don't understand is not all the bees are in the boxes. So when this trailer pulled in to the extension office out here, it probably had 10,000 bees buzzing around the trailer. And all of us were out there dressed like this, ready to get our bees. And it was interesting. But if you ever want to see something interesting, see them dumping thousands of bees and not getting stung and how it's a process and a business. When your bees come in, you should put them in their hive. But sometimes you're not ready. Sometimes you don't have your box set. Sometimes you don't have your frames put together. With a nuke, and remember, a nuke is simply a little hive. It already has a queen. It already has brood. It already has honey. So what you do, you take your nuke out and you put it, if you're going to want your hive right here, you put that nuke right here. Then whenever you're going to put it in the box in the next day or two, and you can open it up and let the bees fly in and out. That will be their home. Packaged bees are a little different. You store them in a cool, dark place. A lot of people substitute garage for that, but you put them someplace they're not going to overheat. Where it says a spritz of syrup or water, that means you take a spray bottle and a 1-to-1 sugar to water mix, and you spray the bees. And what that does, they lick on each other. That's their food. They can't fly very well because they're all covered with sugar water, and it starts drawing them together. And you're going to use that sugar water again here in a minute. please place the hive exactly where you want it to be. You can move a hive from here to about 3 feet away, and these bees will come over and still be a part of that hive. But if you have a hive here and you move it over here or across the yard, the bees, when they go out of the hive, will come back to the original spot. And you can say, well, you can see the hive is right over here, but the bees don't. They've got a GPS and it's set, and they will come here. And the reason I say set it exactly where you want to, then you have a choice if you've made a mistake. You can move it 3 feet, wait a day, move it 3 feet, wait a day, move it 3 feet. And you got to remember, you're moving the base, you're moving the concrete blocks, you're moving everything else as you're doing this. Or if you've got a friend that lives, 2-3 miles away, you can pick up your hive, take it over to their place, leave it 3, 4, 5, 6 days, bring it back to the place that you want it to go. The easiest thing is put it where you want it to go, make a decision where you want your hive to be, and then put your nuke there when you're ready to install. Okay, here you are with that's your nuke box. And this is the hive body that you're going to be putting it in. You should put on your protective clothing, you should light your smoker, and you should remove 6 frames from the inside of your box. Now, how many frames is there in a nuke? 5. Why are you removing 6? Remember, you don't want to smash your bees. You don't want to pull them out and roll them or push them in and all that because you may kill your queen. So you leave that 6 frames so you've got plenty of room. As you take the frames out of your nuke, I'm sorry, let me back up. As you take a frame out, I usually start with the outside frame. I'm not saying it's 100%, it's probably 80% that the queen will not be on your outside frame, she'll be on the inside frames where she's laying. So you take the outside frame and you pull it out and you put it right here on the far right just like it is. Then you take the second frame and put it in, third frame, put it in, making sure that you're not rubbing the bees against each other. It really helps if you don't drop it. And I didn't use you remember the frame grip thing I showed you the other day? Some people don't want it, they're scared. This would be a good time that you accidentally release the pressure just a little bit and that thing will drop. And the bees aren't mad on the way down, but when they hit, they get really aggravated. And so just remember that you put these bees from the nuke into the box in the same configuration that they are already, and you just slide things over. And right now there's no propolis in there, so you're good to go on sliding and things. And you slide it over, you add that extra frame. You take the rest of the bees that are in the nuke, and you take it upside down, and you go pop, just like that. Not bash, but just pop, and all those bees drop out into the box. Then there will still be some new bees or some bees left in the box. You put it right out in front of the hive body, and by evening time, they will all have gone into the hive. You should put in a feeder, or you should have your sugar water already ready to go, and then you just close it up. You put on package or protective clothing. You don't need to use a smoker because they're not a family yet. They're not, they're a bunch of insects is what they are right there that you're working with. You pry off this top cover right here. You remove the sugar can and you put the cover back on. You put it back over and leave all the bees still in there. You'll pull out the queen's cage, and if you notice, it has candy, which is a hardened sugar product, hopefully not too hard because you're going to eat through it. And it'll have a cork, and it'll have a cork. And I have bought them where you had candy on both ends of it. And you're going to install this, and I wish I had a giant rubber band like this a lot of times, but most of the times I don't. I take my 2 frames and I shove them together, and I put this queen cell, and I put the screen where it's up and down, and you want it horizontal or slightly elevated with the candy. You want to make it so that if you notice, she has a group of worker bees or attendant bees in there with her that are feeding her and things. You want to make sure if one of those dies, she can still get out of the cage, that she doesn't block the hole. And you put it in there, and the reason that you've got it sitting in this configuration where it's up like that, because you want all the bees in the hive to come up and rub on her, smell on her, grab her scent and spread it to the rest of the bees. You don't want it turned sideways where it's shoved into the 2 frames where the bees can't get to her. After you've got the queen and you put the cover on the package, I've said that twice there, you remove the cork from the end of this, which just leaves the sugar plug, and you place the queen, like I said, in between 2 frames. Where it says remove 3 frames from the hive, what I do at this time, I take that bottle of sugar water and I start spraying my bees. And I take the frame from the hive body that I'm going to put them in, I make an empty hole right in the middle. Then I'm going to, like I said, it's called the bump and dump, but you spray them, you turn them over, you've got the hole where you just took the top off of it, and you shake them down into where you took those 3 frames out of your box. You're simply emptying that box, and you shake them into it, and then you take your 3 empty frames that you took out, and you put them back in there. Make sure you've got, if you notice with the nuke and with the packaged bees, you want to have a feeder with syrup. You close up the hive. You take the box that you probably don't have all the bees out of. You leave it out in front of the new hive, because by evening time, all those bees will be in the box. Feed your new hive. Always feed a new colony. It takes 6 to 8 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. Think about how much wax it takes to take a frame from this out like this. And if they're having to go out and procure that, it's going to slow down the process of this. Feed until they have drawn out all the comb. If they stop taking your feed, that means they found a food source they like better than the water sugar water that's right there at the hive. Or if you start adding honey supers. You remember what the purpose of honey supers was? Oh, I should have had a test at the end of it last time. That's where you want your bees to make their honey and store it. You don't want your sugar water to be your honey. Now, in some countries they do this. They run sugar through a bee and that becomes your honey. But we like honey that comes from natural sources. Leave them be. A nuke, you need to leave them undisturbed for 1 week, but check the feeders and make sure they've got plenty of sugar water. Packaged bees, on day 4, you confirm that the queen has been released. How do you do that? You open it up, you take a look in that box, it should be empty. If not, if she's still in there, you should release her. By that, I mean you can take the cork out of the other end with a little knife or whatever. We're going to make sure that we're going to pretend that they accept this queen. She's been in there 4 days, so we're hoping, and it's the only queen they've got. You should feed until they stop taking it or put on your honey super. Undisturbed does not mean you can't sit there and watch your bees going in and out. This is when I love it. You go out there and you sit down there beside it and you watch them, and they're going in and out, and you'll see one come in with pollen on its legs, and you think, oh, this is cool. Because usually when they got pollen on their legs, that means that they're making babies, and they're wanting to feed their babies and things. So but you should, undisturbed does not mean you can't go out there and be a part with your bees. It just means you're not going through the boxes. Complete hive. If you buy a complete hive from someone, use ratchet straps when you're moving it. Crank that baby so that it's not going to come apart as you drive down the road, because you're going to have a problem. You should have friends, because complete hives are heavy. And you should have equipment when you're moving. Place a hive exactly where you want it to go. Be sure and go through it, hopefully with a bee inspector before moving it. If you got a hive, it has a chance of having bee diseases, and if you're buying a hive from a person, they're supposed to have our state inspector inspect it. When you go out and buy nukes from people, they're supposed to have those nukes inspected. And have your protective equipment with you during the move. In case your beehive comes apart and you have to work with it, you know, it's really good to have the equipment while you're doing it. And that is it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Earl. The only thing I'll add, for those of you that may be planning on ordering new bees this year, when you go to pick up your bees, whether it's a nuke or whether it's, it's always a good idea to have, if you don't have a pickup truck that's open, you don't want them sitting out there in the shade very long, but if you're gonna put them in your car, I like those mesh bags that you can put around your nuke. Otherwise, you're driving down the road and you've got, because what the bees will do, they smell the queen, they smell other bees, you may have a closed up nuke and you'll have 10 bees on the outside of that box or that'll come join the party, as it were. So always a good idea to have a nice little mesh bag that you can put over your nuke or your package, so that when you put it in your car, you're not driving like a mad person down the road when they start flying around, getting in your face. I will say the post office, last time I went and picked some up there, they said, well, there's obviously a hole in it. There's bees on the outside. I'm like, nope, those are just bees from around the county that smelled a party and came to hang out. So you'll get that. Next up, John's going to give us, is John? Oh, there's John. There he is. Okay. Is going to talk about what to do next. You've got your bees, you've got them installed in the hive, and now it's time to become a beekeeper.
All right. Thank you very much, Jay. Good evening. For those of y'all who don't know me, I'm John Zavishlak. I'm a professor at the university in the entomology department, and I'm the extension honeybee specialist for the whole state. So my job, believe it or not, is to teach people about bees and pollinators. I can't believe there's a job that great, and I sure can't believe that they gave it to me, but somehow I lucked out, and so this is what I get to do. I brought you guys some handouts for tonight, so hopefully you grab some of those. If not, there's some out on the table outside. And so this big booklet, kind of a primer on everything that you need to know to get started. And then this little one is everything that could possibly go wrong with your honeybees in one convenient little booklet. So it looks like scary stuff, but most of that, hopefully you won't see anytime soon. So we'll just hope for the best there. But they asked me to talk a little bit about hive management and inspection. And so hive management is really, our goal as beekeepers is to keep the bees, to keep the colonies of bees. We want them to be healthy, housed, and productive. And so that's what our hives are for. The hive itself is the structure that the bees live in. So this could be a beehive these wooden boxes that most of us will probably be using. It could be a hollow tree. It could be the wall of your garage. If a bee finds a little piece of trim missing and moves inside with a big swarm, that does happen too. So any structure the bees live in is a hive. A hive body is just one of these boxes, and there's different sizes of those. I don't know if you guys covered this in previous lessons, so I won't get bogged down in that. But the colony is the bees itself. A lot of people use these terms interchangeably, but properly, the hive is just the box, and the colony is the family of bees. So the bees can really make themselves at home inside any suitable cavity. In nature, that's a hollow tree, but if you're unlucky enough to not use your barbecue for a while and the bees find a place, they may like that. Like I said, they sometimes end up inside of homes or sometimes other unusual places. I've seen bees move into all kinds of crazy locations. But of course, in nature, often it's a hollow tree or a little cave or a cleft in the rocks, things like that. This is the standard Langstroth hive that most beekeepers use. There's also top bar hives that have gained a little bit of popularity. This is the old-fashioned skep that was kind of the standard of beekeeping for hundreds of years, since medieval times in Europe. It's really just a straw basket turned upside down, and there's a little gap in the bottom, or you just prop up the edge of it with a rock or something, and bees would go in. And it was perfect for bees to build a home, but to harvest honey or to do anything else with the bees, you had to smoke them out and then destroy the entire beehive, the whole structure of the combs inside. So something like this allows it's very modular. It allows us to be able to manipulate the hive, and it's much more convenient for us and for the beekeepers. So there's a lot of people that will tell you that you have to use this hive or this method or that method. But just remember, bees will live in just about anything. You could raise bees in an old microwave oven if you wanted. I mean, they'll live in any suitable cavity. So our beekeeping starts with site selection. There's certain things that are great for the bees and some things that aren't so great. A lot of places we're not going to be able to find everything that we need, but if we think about what the bees really are looking for, that'll help us to set things up. So obviously bees want nectar. They want to make some honey. We want our bees to make honey. But for a lot of us, we're just backyard hobbyist beekeepers. We're looking to keep a couple of beehives near the house. Bees are going to find what they want nearby. This is not something that we really want to worry about. If you were doing this on a commercial scale, really trying to make a lot of honey, then you might actually move your bees around to pollinate different crops and to find different blooms. But for a lot of us, we just allow the bees to find whatever it is that they need. Bees do need fresh water. In the summertime, when it gets hot, they use that to cool down their hives. And actually, if you live in the Fayetteville city limits, you are legally required by the city regulations to keep fresh water on hand for your bees. And that's so that they don't discover your neighbors' swimming pools and bird baths and other water sources. So we need to provide them with some fresh water. Do be careful about water, though. Sometimes it's a little too much of a good thing. This was Two Rivers Park in Little Rock, near where I used to live, and that was my apiary right there. I was 200 feet from the water. I thought I was safe, but I was measuring that horizontal. I was only about 5 feet from the water vertically, and in 2019, the entire park was underwater, so I lost a lot of bees then. So be mindful of that. Those 400-year floods seem to be happening about every 4 or 5 years now. If you've got bees in a big open pasture, big meadow, then you might consider putting up a windbreak, especially in the cold winter. You know which direction all of your bad weather's coming from. If you can put your beehives where they're up against a barn or a building, a fence, a big thicket of trees, then that's helpful for the bees. But if they're out in the open, you might want to consider putting up something that's going to block some of that wind. Makes it a little easier for them. And we try to face our bees towards the morning sun. That seems to be what bees prefer in nature. That's what they choose if they have a choice. And so we like to turn our beehives to face the sun if we can. Also, we like to put our hives where they'll get some good afternoon sun. Some of the older literature on bees said put your bees in the shade for them to help keep it cool, but that was before we had these small hive beetles. Those guys are rotten little jerks that will invade our hives, and they don't like the sun. If you keep your bees in the shade and you keep other bees in the sun, I can almost guarantee that the ones in the shade will have many more hive beetles. So put them out there where they're going to get sun in the afternoon. Not everybody can have the ideal spot. Not everybody's got plenty of room to decide where to put them. So again, if you just have a couple of hives in your backyard, do your best, situate them where they're not going to bother our neighbors and where they're going to be convenient for ourselves. So we want a convenient location. You know, in some cities where people don't have backyards, they keep bees on rooftops and balconies and things like that. This seems like a horribly inconvenient place to keep your bees here, but I suppose that's better than no bees at all until it's time to harvest honey and you're trying to carry 50 pounds up and down a ladder, kind of awkward, so might be a better place to keep them. Having easy access to your bees is good. If you can just roll right up to them with a cart or even drive a truck, look, looks like tire tracks here, and they're carrying that hive. So if you can pull your truck right up to it, though, that's definitely convenient. But wheelbarrows, carts, garden carts, all kinds of things, especially when you're carrying all the heavy honey away. And if you've got your bees on a hill, you want to be able to go downhill with the heavy stuff, not try to fight uphill with the heavy stuff. I would recommend that you take care of your beekeeping equipment. It'll last a long time if you do, so paint your hives. It doesn't have to be as fancy as that, but you definitely want to protect your investment because if you don't, it's not going to last long. And if you've priced all the beekeeping equipment and everything, then you know how much you're about to spend on this new hobby, so you definitely want to keep things in good shape. Eventually, you know, wooden boxes will wear out. I've got boxes that are probably 20 years old. They've got about 40 coats of paint on them, so they're about a quarter inch thicker than they used to be. But they have lasted me a long, long time. Eventually, it seems like they always wear out around the corners because this is where I stick my hive tool in and wrench them apart when they're stuck. And so, when this happens to some of my boxes, you can run them across a table saw and turn a deep into a medium, and you can get a few more years out of them. Just be mindful of the nails in there when you're running that across your table saw, or borrow the one from your neighbors. You can use oil paint, latex paint. It doesn't really matter. The bees don't care as long as it's cured, so don't worry about that. Don't paint the inside of your boxes. The bees will do their own interior decorating. They coat the inside with this substance called propolis that protects the wood, and it actually kills germs, and so we don't need to paint the inside. If you want to paint the top edge of the boxes, that's fine, but eventually that all gets scraped off anyway. And two painted surfaces with a lot of weight on them tend to stick together after a while, so I don't try to paint that edge, but if paint ends up on there, it doesn't break my heart, but I do give the outside a good coating. I always go to the hardware store and look for the oops paint because it's about half the price of brand new paint that they mix up for your color. If you don't care what color it is, the bees don't either. So all of my apiaries wind up looking like that. Random colors everywhere. You can start out making beautiful hives like that, but pretty soon you're going to combine two hives, and one of these boxes is going to be on that one, and this one's going to be turned around backwards, so your flower stems don't match up. Unless you do a whole lot of work to move all the frames from one box to another and keep them all in the perfect spot, they're all going to wind up getting mixed up. This is one of my hives here, so my children like to airbrush hot rod flames on the side. They think it makes the bees go faster. I always put a coat of primer on there before I put the paint on, and it seems to help it stick. It lasts a long, long time. So protect your investment there.
You ever paint while the bees are in it?
No, I've never painted while the bees are in it. Bees will get stuck to the outside, and I have occasionally taken a box out and without painting it and used it because I had to. I caught a swarm and I didn't have a box ready. You'll never paint that box because it's got bees in it, and you'll just forget. There's always something more important. But no, don't go out there and try to paint while the bees are inside. Wintertime is the time to paint. So when you've got equipment that's doesn't have bees on it, that's when you fix it up, paint it, get it ready again for next spring. So when it comes to examining your hive, then you want to get yourself organized. Get all your tools together. Hive tools, great for beehives, handy for everything else in carpentry and other jobs around the house. They're a little thinner than a standard crowbar, and so they always seem to wander off. So get an extra hive tool, paint it bright orange because you're going to lose it in the grass at some point. You'll find it with your lawnmower, but that's not going to do your hive tool or your lawnmower blades any favors. So keep them all together in a toolbox or a bucket or something like that. If you've got to drive a little ways before you get to your bees, make sure that you've got a checklist. Take everything you need. Got to feed them, bring some food, your weed eater. Otherwise, you get out there, you realize, oh, I don't have what I need. And you got to drive back, and then you got to go back, and it's 100 degrees outside. Make sure you got some smoker fuel, because you're always going to have to check your bees right after it rains, so make sure you've got dry smoker fuel on hand. Extra supers, anything else that you think you might need. So get it all ready before you suit up and go out there. How many of y'all know how to light a smoker? Like 2 hands here, and that's some of the experienced beekeepers, huh? Yeah, so learn how to do this, learn how to do it right. You need a hot fire in the bottom, and then you pack the rest of it full of fuel, whatever fuel you like to use. Pine needles are great, burlap if you can find it. There's other things you can use, but you want to make sure that you get a nice hot fire going in the bottom. You can start it with paper, load it with fuel lightly, puff the bellows. It blows air into the bottom and back out the top, but you want to get that fire going, and then slowly fill it with fuel, packing it down, puffing it as you go to keep that fire going. Otherwise, you're going to light a fire, and a lot of people cram it full of pine needles, and then it goes out. So you can't smother it. You want to make sure that it's still going. It should smolder a little bit while you're working. Even if you're not using it, it should smolder a little bit until you need it. And the second you need it is when it goes out. But you don't fill it with fuel and then put a match on top. That might light up, but it doesn't last very long. So the fire goes down in the bottom. And even if you're not using your smoker, you set it on the ground or something, I like to take my foot periodically while I'm working with my hands, and I'll pump the bellows with my foot every couple minutes just to make sure that it's still going, so that when I do need it, it's still there. So learn how to use it, learn how to light it, do it right, but don't overdo it. Bees don't need a lot of smoke, a light smoke. The purpose of the smoke is just to mask the pheromone language that the bees are using to communicate with each other. And in particular, the one called alarm pheromone. It actually smells like bananas. You can smell it. When the bees get riled up and you're not using your smoke and you're standing there over your hive and you're working and you catch a little whiff of bananas in the air, isopenyl acetate, for you chemistry majors. It smells like bananas. It's the same chemical. And when one bee gets upset, she gives off this odor. It alerts all the other bees there's danger, and they all get into a really bad stingy mood all of a sudden. So that smoke covers that up so that one bee doesn't know that another bee has gotten upset. But when you over smoke them, then that makes them a little irritated too. So we don't need too much. A little dab will do us. Then get ready and suit up. You could suit up first and then light your smoker, but I prefer to do it the other way, especially if you got a big heavy bee suit on and it's hot summertime. The less time you spend all zipped up in there, then probably the better. Modern bee suits are full of options. They've got all these zippers and flaps and snaps and Velcro and elastic all over them. And about a quarter of the time, I'll put the hood on and I'll get ready to go and I'll have the whole hive open up and I'll look down and I'll realize that the zipper's all the way down to here. So make sure you do zip that up. They work a lot better when you actually do that. There's one part of a bee suit that it seems like a lot of people don't know about. On the cuff down here, there's often a little elastic band. And that goes over your thumb so that when you put your gloves on, it doesn't shove the sleeve all the way back up to your shoulder. These long gauntlets here. So that goes over your thumb, in case you were wondering. Some suits don't have that. They've started cutting corners on them now, but a good one will have one of those. And some of them have zippers down at the bottom of the leg to go around your boots, and then you can zip it on tight and all kinds of good stuff. So familiarize yourself with your bee suit and how it all goes together to keep the bees out. Now we're finally ready to open our hive. Before you even smoke it, just stop and take a look. See what the bees are doing. You see them coming in with pollen, that's a good thing. The more the better, different colors, that's a good thing. Which direction are the bees going? You know, are they all flying over here? Are they going this way? Are they going straight out? That tells you to stand on the other side. You don't want to be in the way. You allow the bees to come and go. If you stand right in front of the hive as they're coming out, they'll go around you, and then when they come back, a lot of them land on your back, and you don't notice that until you're ready to take your bee suit off. Maybe you're in the house or getting in your vehicle. So give a little puff of smoke down here. Not a whole lot, but a little dab. And wait a few seconds. Crack the top open. Again, a little puff there at the top. Take the lid off. Maybe give a little puff right there in that hole on the inner cover. And lift it up, maybe another little puff, nice and gentle. You just want the odor of the smoke to kind of pervade everything and mask any pheromones that the bees might be shouting to each other with. So, as I said, stand out of the flight path. When you take the lid off, I like to take the lid and lay it down on the ground upside down. And then I'll stack my supers on that as I open the hive up. This is assuming that you've got more than one box to unstack. I always stand, if I can, working with the sunlight coming over my shoulder. And this is because when you pick up a frame, you're looking at something flat, but it's actually thousands of little tiny cans. And you want to be able to see to the bottom of all those cells. And so if the sun's coming in at an angle, then that puts everything into a shadow. But if the sun's coming over your shoulders, then it's easy to kind of tilt that around so you can see the eggs, the larvae, the other things that are inside of those cells. And if you're not sure where your queen bee is, then it's very important to stand with your frames over the hive to examine them. Because if that queen drops off into the tall grass behind you, because you're standing like this, away from the hive, you may not notice, and she's gone. And she doesn't fly very well once she's all primed to lay eggs. Gravid, we call it. Once she's plump with eggs, she can kind of flutter to the ground safely, but she can't fly very well, and she may not be able to get back to the hive. And as you're walking away from the hive, you may go crunch and step on her without noticing. So we don't want to do that. Stand with the frame over the hive, and unlike what this guy's doing, and keep your hives, your frames in a vertical orientation, unlike what this fella's showing off here. So your bees live on a vertical surface. So when you want to examine your hive, hold your frames like that. If you need to see the backside, we don't flip them over. For one thing, if there's nectar in that frame, we just dumped it out because it's as thin as water until the bees cure it into honey. If you want to see the other side, turn it up on end, then rotate it around, and then back down. It's okay if it's upside down. The bees don't care about which orientation it is, but as long as it's vertical and not horizontal. Because when gravity changes, a lot of bees are holding on to other bees, and suddenly that might cause some of them to fall off. So we do our best to keep our frames kind of in a vertical orientation when we're examining them. And now when we take boxes off, we set them on top of the hive lid, and I always turn them 90 degrees. And this is so that your lid is here, And instead of setting that box directly on the ground, because there's bees on the bottoms of the frames, we don't want those to get squished. We don't want leaves and grass and dirt to stick to the underside of the frames. And of course, the edges of our boxes have propolis that stick to everything. So when we do it like this, there's only 4 little points of contact where that box is sitting on the edge of the lid, and so it's really easy to pick it up again. If you set it down inside of the lid completely, then the whole thing can stick, and that can be harder to get it up sometimes. If you need to, you can always just put your foot on the edge of that and then lift the box up. If you're taking another box off, again, turn it 90 degrees to the one underneath for the same reason. We don't want to crush any bees, and it's a lot easier, keeps them from sticking together. Some people will use a robbing cloth. This is just a towel or something like that over the top of the frames that you take off. This is usually used if you have a bunch of honey and it's summertime and maybe not a lot of flowers out. And so this prevents bees from another hive coming over and finding all of this free honey sitting out. So this just covers it up temporarily while we're working, and it allows everything to just stay a little bit more secure. Notice the first frame is right here on the front. It's leaning up against it, it's staying vertical, and very little contact, just a couple of points where it's leaning up against the hive or the hive stand and on the ground. Any bees that are on this frame will typically just keep doing what they're doing. If there's brood there, they'll keep minding the brood. Sometimes, though, they'll walk up and they'll walk back in towards the entrance. Often I'll take my inner cover off, because there's usually bees on the underside of it, and I'll put the inner cover leaned up against the front of the hive, so any bees that are on it can just walk right in. And I'll lean the frame that I pull out up against the hive. Once you've got one out, then you've got a gap in there where you can manipulate and move all of the other ones into that gap. The first frame that I like to remove is the second one from the wall. These frames are self-spacing. They've got a wider sidebar, and then there's a little gap. So there's a little bit more space in between any 2 of the frames than there is between the frame and the wall. And if you just pull up that one right there, there's a chance you can roll the bees against the wall, and they don't like that. And they'll give off that alarm pheromone, and they'll tell the other bees that you're a big meanie and you deserve a nice sting. So to avoid that, take your hive tool and start with this second frame. It doesn't matter which side, but start with that second frame and kind of loosen it up, wiggle it around in there, push the frames on either side away so that it creates the biggest gap you can, and then lift it straight up. If you've got one of those frame grippers, you can use that. Just hold on to it really tight, but you use your hive tool to lift that up, or lift up one corner and then the other and take it out. So once you've got that frame out, you can set it down like I said, or they make a little hook that hangs here on the side of your hive, and you can put each frame on there, take out 1 or 2, but once you've got a gap in there, now the next frame, you can just slide it into the gap, and you can pull that out, look at it, put it back in, slide it over, then go to the next one, slide it over, go to the next one, slide it over, so your gap keeps moving along. After you've looked at all of the frames, you put them back in and slide them back where they were, and then the last frame you put in is the first one that you took out. So everything goes back where you found it. The bees have arranged everything in the hive the way they want it for their convenience, to maintain the temperature, to keep the food close to where the brood is, and everything else. So we want to put it right back where we found it, unless we have a specific reason that we want to move things around. And sometimes we do, but if you don't, put it back where you found it. You wouldn't want somebody coming over and just completely rearranging your kitchen, right? You go to find a saucepan and there's a jar of pickles there. So you'd be searching all over the place to find everything to make dinner. So don't make your bees work extra hard. Now, sometimes bees they'll draw out a bunch of combs, and it seems like they're just ignoring the ones on the other side of the hive. You could take an empty one out and move it into the middle of the brood nest, and the bees will draw that comb out. in the spring. Not so much when you get late into the summer, but in the spring when there's a nectar flow going, they will draw that out really fast because they don't like to have that empty space in the middle of the brood nest. Same with honey supers. If they seem to be ignoring one side of the hive, then move some of those empty ones in between the area where they're actively storing nectar. They'll start drawing those out. So we can move things around if we need to. Sometimes we move frames from one hive to another. Sometimes we want to take a frame of brood and donate it to another hive to kind of give them a little population boost. Sometimes we need to raise a queen in a hive that's lost its queen. We can take a frame of brood or a frame that has a queen cell on it that the bees have started. We can put that into another hive. But if we don't have a specific reason to manipulate things, then I like to just leave it where the bees had it. So as we're, excuse me, as we're looking in the hive, what exactly are we looking for? We've all seen pictures of beekeepers doing this. We're picking them up and we're studying them, and what exactly are we looking for? Are we just pretending like we know what we're doing? Shh, don't tell anybody. So the main things that we're doing is we're assessing the colony's health. We want to make sure that the queen is in good shape, the brood is in good shape, and the workers are in good shape. What about the drones? If everybody else is fine, they probably are too, so we don't have to worry about them so much. But the queen, of course, is essential for the health of the colony and its success and its future. And the brood, of course, is the future of the colony. Thank you. And so there are certain diseases that can affect the brood. All of that, of course, is in your itty-bitty bee notebook, so you can look through those horror stories later. And, of course, the workers have to do everything, so we want to make sure they're in good shape. We're also looking at the amount of space in the hive. For the particular time of year, the season that we're in, we want to make sure that the bees have the resources and the space that we need, so both for the honey supers and for the brood nest. So if you can see the queen, well, that's good. You know she's there. But you don't have to find the queen every time you open the hive. Don't get obsessed about it. Some people say, I can't find a queen to save my life. I've gone years without seeing a queen bee. That's okay. As long as you can find eggs in the hive, the queen is there. So don't worry about that. If you do see her, does she look healthy? That's a good, healthy-looking queen, a nice plump abdomen. As they get older, sometimes they get a little worn-looking. There are diseases that affect bees that, if they look sick, they probably are. There's some things that have very specific symptoms. A lot of things, though, there's viruses that don't have any specific symptoms. The bees just don't live as long, but that's a little harder to diagnose. Look at the brood. If you don't have good eyesight, get some reading glasses, because you're going to be looking at some very tiny things. And so you want to be able to see down in the bottoms of these cells, and you want to be able to see the larva, nice pearly white, healthy looking brood, compared to things that look like they're kind of twisted around, discolored, melting down. These are all signs of something called European foul brood that we don't want to see. So we want to see brood that looks like this. And we want to look at the brood pattern. This is an easy way to assess how your queen is doing. So you look at the capped brood, and you want every single cell to be filled and capped. That's a good sign. That means you've got a dynamite queen. The workers are healthy, they're well-fed, they're able to feed the brood. You're always going to see a few empty cells in there. That's normal. When the queen came along, she might have skipped one accidentally. There was a drone sitting on top of it, so she just went around. There could have been pollen in there. It wasn't clean enough for her standards, so she skipped it. But we want her to be laying an egg in every cell, and we want them to raise the brood. Sometimes we get a lousy brood pattern, lots of empty cells. Some people call it a shotgun brood. It looks like somebody hit it with buckshot because it's just random. And there's various reasons why that may be. It could be a brood disease. So she's laying eggs in every cell, but some of them are getting sick and they're being removed by the workers. It could be that your queen is shooting blanks. And so she's missing some, or the eggs she's laying are not developing. So there's different issues like that can simply be resolved by replacing the queen that we have. But if the brood pattern looks good, that's a good sign, and that's good news for us. Look down inside the cells and see if you can see bee eggs. I don't know if you guys can see them from where you're sitting, but they're pretty tiny. It looks like a grain of rice stuck end on into the back of that cell, but much smaller. But eggs hatch in 3 days. So if you can see eggs, your queen was there at least 3 days ago. Hopefully she's still there. But even if you killed the queen, putting that last frame in, you feel that crunch, you think, uh-oh, I killed a bee. Well, what are the odds it was the 1 out of 40,000 that was actually important, right? Sometimes you open it up again and there's no queen. What could have possibly happened? It was never my fault, right? So if you can see eggs, that's good. You don't have to find the queen. Even if you can just find young brood, teeny tiny brood, we call it milk brood sometimes, it's floating in a pool of royal jelly. Did you guys cover that before, brood food? Okay, so they feed them royal jelly for the first 3 days, then they switch them to the bee bread. So as long as you can find the tiny brood, the milk brood, still floating on their food, they can still rear those into a queen if they need to. Older brood gets a little bit bigger, it starts to fill the whole cell, and then it's going to get all capped off. So we like to see all of these different stages. And a good, healthy colony should be in about a 1-to-4 ratio of eggs, open cells, capped cells. And that has to do with the number of days that the larva stays in each of those stages. So it's an egg for 3 days, it's a larva for twice as many, 6 days, and then 12 days, twice that number, that they would be in the cap stage. So if everything is doing good, you don't have to count every single one, but kind of eyeball it. If that looks about right throughout the whole hive, then your queen is doing good, and you don't need to worry too much. How much drone brood do you have? Can you recognize the drone brood? So this is worker brood up here, down below, these big, larger diameter, kind of puffy, longer capped cells. These are the drones, these are the boy bees, these are the girl bees. This is capped honey up here, so this looks wet. The brood cappings look a little dry. So this is a good frame. Even if you put brand new foundation in this year and they draw it all out, they're gonna still try to raise some boys down at the bottom. Having some drones in the hive is a good sign. It means times are good for this colony. They've got plenty to eat. They're not stressed out nutritionally. And so this is a good balance. But when you start to see drone brood all over the place, it means either the comb has been damaged and they built it back in drone-sized cells and then the queen will only put drones in it, or your queen has become a drone layer, she's old and she's only gonna lay drones or majority drones, or you've lost your queen and now you've got laying workers and they're starting to lay eggs and they can only produce drones, so they're putting drones all over the place. But too many drones is bad, a few drones is good. Too many drones, even if you got a good queen and you've got some old comb that's messed up and they're raising drones in it, then the more drones you have, the more varroa mites you have. Have you all covered varroa mites yet? Well, we're gonna mention those again. You're gonna have to understand varroa mites. They're a nasty parasite. It's the #1 cause of honeybee decline around the world. And they breed faster on the drone brood than they do the worker brood. So we want to limit the amount of drone brood if possible. This is a queen cell. So queens are reared in these special elongated vertical cells, either on the bottom edges of the comb sometimes, or they convert worker cell into a queen cell. This would be if the workers decide to replace their queen, or if they need to raise one in an emergency from existing larvae, then this is what you'll see. So if you see that, they're trying to raise a new queen, and you need to figure out why, if they're trying to replace one, if she's already gone, etc. How much room does the queen have to lay? If you started your hive in one box, sometimes we have to add another one. If the queen runs out of room, she's gonna leave and take about 2/3 of the workers with her. That's called a swarm. So we wanna make sure that she's got enough room, because once the bees start putting nectar in and you've all got all the bees in one hive body so far, then as bees hatch out of their cell, their pupal cell, they clean that cell up, get it ready for the queen to lay another egg, but then another bee will come along and start putting nectar in those cells. So they're backfilling the brood nest with honey because there's no other place to put it. So we got to put another box on top for the bees to have room for food as well. So we need room for the queen to lay, and we want to look for signs that the workers are healthy. So this is there's a virus that causes bees to look kind of greasy and unkempt like that, hairless. It's called a paralysis virus. This one is called deformed wing virus. Their wings are crinkly. They can't fly. This is called K-wing. They can't pull their hind wings back. They stick out, so their wings are kind of like the letter K with these and those go in different directions. And that is one of those varroa mites. The varroa mite spreads a lot of viruses and other diseases. It does physical damage to the bees. It corrupts their immune system while giving them pathogens, so they do a lot of things. So just as you're going through the hive, keep an eye on the bees. Do they look healthy? Hopefully so, but some of the things that have very obvious symptoms we want to look out for. And as I said, we're also assessing the food supplies. So pollen is the food that bees need to raise brood. That's where all their nutrition comes from. Honey is just sugar. That's fuel. It's got a little bit of pollen mixed in with it, some other micronutrients, but for the most part, it's just sugar. And so they can't raise brood if they don't have protein, which they bring back in the form of pollen. So we want to see bees bringing pollen back, and we want to see it stored in the comb. If you were to dissect the comb, you'd see they're stacked up like pancakes inside, layers of different colors. And they store it around the brood nest. Hopefully, you'll see that around there, and the more the better, the more different colors the better, because no one pollen has all the nutrients that they need, so they want a polyfloral diet with lots of different pollens that have lots of all the different proteins and amino acids that a growing bee needs. And of course, honey. That's what we all really want, right? Honey. When you're looking at the amount of honey that they've got, how much of it is capped off like this? How much of it is uncapped? That means it's still nectar, it's too thin. The bees have not declared that it's ready. They haven't put a lid on it. Bees invented canned food. You have to trust their judgment. So when they say it's ready, they'll put a lid on it. And how much empty space is there? Depending on the season, there may be time for you to put another box on full of empty comb and let them draw that out and fill it up as well. General rule of thumb, if about 3/4 of the frames have nectar in them, then you can go ahead and add another super. I mean, this is up until, about early to mid-June. Then you might not want to do that. Just allow them to finish filling and capping it off. As they dry the honey down, remove all the moisture, the volume of the honey actually, it decreases, so they can pack more and more honey into the same cells. So it's much more efficient for them to store it as honey after they remove all the water. And removing all that moisture, it doesn't allow the nectar to ferment. So they bring the moisture content down to where yeast that occurs naturally can't ferment it, then they seal it up. But once you once they've filled up one box, you can add another, and if the season permits, add another one. A lot of that just depends on your location, how many flowers are around, what kind of resources your bees have access to. This is pretty unrealistic for Northwest Arkansas. For most of us, you're not going to see honey harvest like that maybe once in a lifetime, but dare to dream, right?
How many of those would have honey on the left?
I'm sorry?
How many on the left stack would have honey?
I don't know where that gentleman is. It's potentially I would say in this area, if you can get 2 full supers, you're doing pretty good. Sometimes 3. You're waving your arms at me. You're pointing at the clock.
We're going to do a 5-minute break and then do your next thing. So.
Okay. Well, I've actually got a break scheduled in just a minute, so hold on. I thought you were pointing up, higher, 5 supers, 6 supers. Well, Dr. Zabecki apparently is the master, so she can get 7 or 8 supers. I can get 2, sometimes 3. Remember that your bees have a plan. They know what to do. Bees make better beekeepers than we do. Everything the bees do is about survival and reproduction, which is pretty much the intrinsic goals of any species, right? Any plant, any animal. This is what bees want to do. They want to live to see another day, and then they want to cast off a swarm because that's how the colony reproduces on the colony level. So, honey, they want to gather it. They want to gather that nectar. They want to store it up. They want to use that honey to build up their population every spring so they can swarm. Then they want to continue using that abundant food to build their numbers back up after they swarm to collect enough honey to last through the next year. Every healthy bee colony will try to swarm and then try to build up their numbers again so they have enough honey to make it through next winter. Next summer and next winter, because when it gets hot and dry, they're also going to need honey. So that's the swarm. If you've never seen one of those, that is a majestic sight. Call me when you do. I'll come and collect it, so you guys don't have to worry about that. Bees also sting, believe it or not. If y'all didn't know anything else about a bee, you knew it had a pointy end, right? They do that to protect themselves and their family. Bees are not aggressive creatures. They're actually very gentle, but their mood can change on a dime. They are very defensive. They're all ladies, right? So I knew that joke wouldn't go over well. But my wife wasn't here, so I can say it right now, right? But the bees protect themselves, they protect their hive, they protect their family, they protect their food. Believe it or not, they worked hard and they like honey almost as much as we do. So if you're a good beekeeper, then you understand what the bees are trying to do. Each season of the year, there's different things bees are trying to do. Anticipate what those tasks are, and then we want to help the bees to accomplish that. So in the spring, they're trying to build their numbers up, make sure they've got enough space in the hive. Take advantage of, they're trying to take advantage of all of that food. There we go. So that population is booming. They're going to draw new comb. Springtime is the time you can get them to draw comb in no time. In the summer, the fall, you can hardly pay bees enough to make more wax. Oh, this is called festooning. When you see bees hanging in chains like this from one comb to another, they're drawing comb. So they're actually secreting wax from these little glands on their abdomen, and they're passing them from one bee to the next. And I think they use this chain of bees to find the center of gravity so they can make a perfectly vertical honeycomb. And that's how they are able to build it. Because if they build it at an angle, it's soft, it would just snap off once it got heavy. They want to produce swarms, so be on the lookout for swarms. There's the queen bee laying an egg there. So they want to rebuild that population and store up that food. So as a beekeeper, you want to make sure you've got the right amount of space in the hive. Monitor for swarming. These are swarm cells. When you see queen cells on the bottom edges, your bees are preparing to swarm. So you can split the colony. You can actually take the queen out and put her in a new hive and give her some comb and give her some bees to start a new colony with. And she'll think, did I just swarm? Well, I guess I did. Here I am in a new hive. I must have, I don't remember it, must have got knocked on the head by that hive tool. But if you do this, then you allow the bees to raise their queen in the old hive. This is what the bees wanted to do. Instead of losing your bees, help them out, help them skip a step. Otherwise, you can wait for them to swarm, and then you can catch that swarm and then pour it into a hive. But it's a lot easier to just do it preemptively. And again, you can take advantage of this time of year to get them to draw comb out from bare foundation. In the summertime, they're going to continue gathering flowers as long as they can. It typically stops raining in Arkansas sometime around the middle of June, and as soon as it does, we get into that hot, dry conditions. Last summer was kind of weird. Seems like we had extra rain and then it got extra hot and dry. So there's no guarantees, but once the flowers stop blooming, bees may be eating more honey than they're bringing in, but they are still processing it, they're capping it off, they're collecting the water, they want to keep the hive temperature down, and brood rearing will slow down. So these are all things that we can take note of and kind of understand what's going on in the hive. And the number of varroa mites increases exponentially going into the summer. A lot of the products, medications we have to take care of these pests, we can't use them while we're collecting honey. So that's a different lesson altogether, but want to be aware that the varroa population is building up. So as a beekeeper, again, adjust the amount of space. You don't want to add a super too late in the summer. They're not going to fill it up. That just gives them extra space that they have to control. Make sure that you provide them with fresh water if needed. Harvest the honey. This is usually the second year. Don't expect to get any, maybe a little taste the first year, but your second year they're going to have a much better chance. And you don't want to take too much. Leave them enough for the rest of the summer and also for the winter. And you want to monitor for varroa mites. As we get into the late summer, early fall, bees seal up the hive with propolis. So this is this gooey stuff right here. It's like caulking. Bees collect it from trees, bring it back, and seal up everything. And of course, beekeepers crack the hive open, and we scrape all that stuff off and throw it on the ground, right? Terrible things we do to our bees. Part of this is there's not a lot of flowers in bloom. They have an abundance of workers, so they send them out to gather anything they can find. They'll also start to throw the drones out in the fall. This happened just a few weeks ago. They just kicked them all out. They don't want to feed them through the winter. In the spring, the queen can just start making boys again. She can control when she lays an egg, whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. And we want those fall bees to be healthy and well-fed. We want fat, sassy bees to raise the winter bees. The bees that are being reared right now will have to live all winter long on canned food and then raise a generation of brood in the spring so that the population can start to build back up. So it's important that bees this time of year are healthy and well-fed. As beekeepers, we consolidate the hives. If you haven't done this already, then you need to take off extra supers that haven't been used and kind of compress it down to the overwintering state. We can move frames around and put them in the place that we need to. And we want to evaluate the amount of food and feed them if needed and treat for varroa now that our honey has been removed from the hive. Some people also install mouse guards. Those can be quite pesky. They get in the hives and they can do a lot of damage. In the winter, the cluster, anytime it's below 55, they gather together into a ball and they consume the honey that they have stored up and they use it to generate heat. There's a lot of energy in that sugar and they vibrate their wing muscles and they generate a lot of heat. And occasionally they'll get a sunny day and they will fly outside and they'll take a cleansing flight. They do this all the time, but you don't really notice it until there's snow on the ground, and you might see a few dead bees they've tossed out, and you see these little yellow-brown dots in the snow. That's just bee poo. They fly out, they cleanse themselves, and they go right back in because they don't have any indoor plumbing. But they can hold it for a long time in cold climates. Yes, yeah, you would seal up the bottom if you've got a screen bottom board. Yeah. So periodically, we just check and see how much food they've got and feed them if necessary. There's various ways to do that. Evaluate the season that you had with your bees. Did you have fun? I hope so. Did you get stung? Sorry to hear that, but that just makes your honey sweeter. And then, plan for next year. Wintertime is a time to dream about our next season and how much great times we're going to have and how we're going to expand. So now, Dr. Zabecki was very much wanting to take a break, so we've got that scheduled for right now. If you guys need to run to the restroom, get a drink of water, etc., and we'll come back in a few minutes. So.
If we can, let's try to please keep it to like 5 minutes. We've got quite a bit to cover and not much time left. But we do want to give everybody a restroom break. worries.
All right, welcome back. So we were talking about winter in the beehive, and honeybees are very well adapted to surviving the cold, more so than surviving the heat. Bees will overheat in a sealed up hive in the summertime in no time. When you're moving bees in the back of a truck or something like that, sometimes they put nets over them and they hose them down to keep them cool, but if bees don't have access to the outside, then it's very easy for them to overheat. But they can survive incredibly low temperatures. People keep bees way up into northern Canada and even in Alaska, high in the Alps in Switzerland, so lots of places that have long, cold winters. Places that measure winter in months, unlike here where we measure winter kind of, in weeks. But bees know what to do. So they, like I said, they cluster together and they shiver their wing muscles and generate heat. If you've tried to put your children to bed after trick-or-treating, you know how much energy there is in a couple of lollipops and a Snickers bar, right? So imagine if your kids were on a pure sugar diet. That's what bees are basically eating, honey, all winter long. So this is a thermal image of a bee cluster, and so the temperatures in the middle stays around 93 degrees or so. And you can see an individual bee, the hot spot is right there in their wing muscles, in their thorax. So the cluster kind of gathers into a big ball, and then slowly over the winter time, they move upward in the hive. And so in the fall, when we're consolidating our hives to get ready for winter, make sure that your brood and your queen are all in the middle of the bottom box, and any food, frames of honey, are in the top box. Because your bees are going to move up. Heat rises, the bee cluster rises all winter long and moves up onto that honey. And you can understand this a little bit better thinking about a bee tree. The bee's natural home in a tree, they find a cavity, and the honey is always in the top and the brood is in the bottom. So wherever that queen is, she wanders around and she's laying eggs. And in the summer, as the population starts to shrink and the brood nest gets smaller, she kind of is moving up into the hive. When it starts to get cold, wherever that queen bee is, wherever that little patch of brood is, that's where all the bees cluster. And then through the course of the winter, they are moving up onto that honey, consuming it as they go, keeping themselves warm. And in a narrow cavity like that, they can usually surround all of the combs. Sometimes in our hives, they'll get off over here in a corner and they'll eat all of the honey, and they can actually freeze to death 1 inch away from a full honeycomb because the individual bees can't move off of the cluster to get to some honey and get back. It's too cold. So they only heat the cluster. They don't heat the whole hive. Now, wherever they are in the spring, when it starts to get warm again, the queen starts laying eggs there, and then the queen starts to wander back down. And as she does, they'll take care of the bees and they'll feed them, but they still cluster on the brood when it gets cold at night. But again, they start backfilling all of those cells as the bees hatch out. They fill them with nectar, and that pushes the queen's activity back down here to the bottom. And then next winter, they move back up. So they do this up and down migration. Just remember that the bees prefer to have the honey at the top and the brood at the bottom. And that's why we design our beehives to mimic this. We put the honey supers on the top. Super is the Latin word for above. And then we remove those, but we want to make sure that we have enough food in there for our bees. And if you have a queen excluder, that's a device that the queen can't fit through, always remove that before going into winter. Because your bee cluster will move up, and they're going to be fine, but there's one bee that can't fit through that, and she's literally going to be left out in the cold, and you don't want that to happen. These are the temperatures in Fayetteville last winter. I just downloaded this data for y'all. We all love numbers, right? This is the temperature at which bees cluster. So we are just now getting, to this part of November where it's going to be more cold than warm. So they're going to be spending more time in the cluster than they are flying around. There's still a few days when it gets warm, right? It's going to be 65, 70 degrees tomorrow, I think. So your bees will be out flying around. They're going to be looking for food that may not be there. There might be a little goldenrod, stuff like that left, but not a whole lot. So they're burning a lot of calories on warm days, not replenishing their food. So warm winters, they actually eat through their winter food faster than they do if it stays really cold all winter long. So it's much more efficient for that. If it stayed really cold, they would stay in that cluster. So as we get towards the end of winter, you know, we're towards the end of January, early February, they start flying around again when we get these warm days. Check, see how much food your bees have. You might be thinking, oh, spring's right around the corner, they're gonna be fine. And then we get that last good sudden frost, and the bees have to cluster really tight, and they're over in a corner of the hive, all the way at the top where there's no food. So you can lose your bees the very last day of winter thinking, oh, they'll be fine until spring. So got to plan ahead for that. Now, lately there's been a lot of chatter among different beekeeping forums and some of the magazines, this discussion about high ventilation and condensation and how important this is. And it's really been turned into this issue that doesn't really matter that much for us here in the South. It's kind of a northern issue. So beekeepers in the north, they wrap all their hives in tar paper and insulation, and they have all these upper ventilation holes that allows moisture to escape. This isn't going to be an issue for us, but just be aware when you start reading and watching videos of people beekeeping, talking about overwintering. These people live in Ohio and Pennsylvania and all the way up into Maine and Canada. Not going to be a huge issue for us, but you know, we don't get 3-4 feet of snow that lasts for months. But if you did, it would be important to have an entrance at the top so on warm sunny days the bees can go out, take a cleansing flight, and get back in. And yeah, they insulate and wrap hives because, you know, a tree has a lot more mass in it to insulate the heat inside. But for our bees, I don't think that's such an issue for us down here. This is actually one of my apiaries. When I lived in Little Rock, this was about 2 years ago, we got a big snowstorm. Again, right at the end of winter, beginning of spring, I think it was late February, but 2 days later, all the snow was gone. So not a big issue, just brush away all the snow at the bottom so your bees can come and go. I don't even have top entrances on these. I leave the snow on top, that's just extra insulation. So not something to really worry about. The keys to successful overwintering, though, to have a good, warm, dry hive. Your bees don't need condensation and water dripping on them. A little bit of ventilation in the top allows some of that warm, moist air to chimney out, but it's not a huge issue, especially if you've got an inner cover and then you've got your outer cover on there, then you're not going to have a lot of condensation right over the bees. So warm and dry, you don't want a bunch of busted corners that makes it drafty, things like that. Good nutrition is essential. So think about how much honey they have stored up and where is it located. So in the fall, you want the cluster in the bottom with the brood, you want the top with all the honey. If they don't have enough honey, feed them. If you're not sure if they have enough honey, feed them. Sugar is really cheap compared to replacing your bees, so give them sugar water. You can also make candy boards, so it's just a big flat block of sugar that you can put right on top of them, and as they move up and they're running out of food, lo and behold, the ceiling is made of food when they get up there. If you wanted to, you could actually open up that hive in the snow. Your bees are not going to be happy. They will get the courage and the energy to come out backwards and sting you right in the eye if you just open it up and stick your face there. So wear your veil, wear your gloves. They're not in a good mood in the winter times, but if you open the top of that and peek in really quick and you don't see the bees, but you can hear them down there, that's a good sign. Assuming that you had this hive body here was full of food, if they're not all the way at the top yet, they've got food. But if you crack the lid and your bees are all the way at the top, or you open it up and you can see the little hole in the inner cover and you see a bunch of bee faces, that's not a good sign. That means they're all the way to the top, they're out of food. So you need to get some emergency food on there right away. You can put another hive body on top and put a bucket feeder or a jar feeder right on top of that hole in the inner cover, so you don't even have to disturb them and they can feed right there, or you can put a candy board on or something like that. And you can find lots of information on that. Some of that is in this booklet as well. And good general health. If you want your bees to survive the winter, you got to back up to last summer. You want to make sure that you've got low mite numbers. Those varroa mites are dangerous. And the viruses that they are spreading are dangerous. It's the mite virus complex that is much worse than the sum of its parts. So the only way to control most of the viruses is to control the mites. So that's going to be an issue for all of us. And even though we might have planned everything, we put all the food in, we got the hives all arranged, everything we thought was perfect, we're still all at the mercy of Mother Nature, right? So anything can happen. There's no guarantees in agriculture at all. You guys have been coming here. This is your third week in a row to be here, right? Is there kind of a steep learning curve involved in beekeeping? A little bit. This is what you've covered so far. So literally a drop in the bucket, the tip of the iceberg there. So we want you guys to be successful. After I talk, there's going to be a little bit more, and then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. But I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm available anytime. I have an office here in Fayetteville. So if you want to call me up, chat bees, this is my job. If you go to my website, all of my contact information is on there. I believe it's even inside the back of this little bee book here for you that are frantically writing it down. It's right there. But you can also call up your county extension agent anywhere in the state and say, I want to talk to the bee man. I can't pronounce his name. They'll say, oh, I know who you're talking about. And they'll give you my number. If you want a refresher course, I've got a complete beekeeping class online. You can watch all of this again and you can go back. It's divided up into multiple short videos, so you can see individual lessons if you want. And you can refresh yourself on specific parts if you're feeling a little rusty or if you missed a lesson. And this is a digital copy of that publication that you got. There's also a code on the back, so you can scan that and send it to your friends. And this handy little book here, I know that's got a lot of pages of really fine print. So if you want to download the large print edition for us old guys, you can get that free off of our website. And for you hip youngsters who like everything in your pocket at all times, we also have this optimized for viewing on your phone. So same size as this little paper document, but it's on your phone, so you can pull that out right in your apiary and smear propolis all over your new $1,200 smartphone, right? But lots of good information for you. And we've got other publications on our website, so hit me up if you need anything like that. I wanted to also share this one with you. This is the Honeybee Health Coalition. I keep talking about varroa mites because I want you all to know about them and understand them. And this is an amazing tool, and I couldn't do better, so I'm just going to let them keep doing it. But if you visit their website, and you're trying to figure out what you need to do about treating for varroa mites, there's so many different medications and things, and it'll ask you 4 or 5 simple yes or no questions about how many mites you've got and what time of year it is and whether or not you're opposed to using chemical pesticides in your beehive. And once you answer all that and tell it whether you've got honey on the hive, it'll generate a list of products that are suitable for you for this time of year that fits in with your operation. So this is a great tool. They've also got videos on how to count the mites in your hive, how to use all the different medications. So this is all some great information on there as well. So with that, that's all I had to say. And I think that, thank you. Jay's
Hey, John.
creeping up on me now, so instead of answering questions now, we're going to have Q&A in a minute, and I'm going to let Jay go ahead and talk about honey harvesting.
Honey harvesting. Yeah, we've got these mics up front that we'll use for Q&A here as quick as possible. We're going to take our, if we cut anything short, we're cutting this honey harvesting a little short so that we've got time for Q&A. I do want to highlight that all the resources that John mentioned, especially his YouTube series,
turn that off.
is
Oh, there it is.
in that handout on online resources. You'll see links, the ones he mentioned, as well as ones for the club. We have a resource page for the club with a lot of good links with the state stuff on there as well. That's okay.
I can't find the arrow.
Oh, I can't find it.
It's on that screen. I don't know which way to slide it to get back over onto this one. Does it go up, down, left, right? I don't know. But I'm going to let you figure that one out.
Oh, sure.
Got the man here.
Ah, I found it. Yep. But I do want to highlight, join the club. I see some faces here. We go into these topics a little more in depth and more in line with the season. So we'll talk about honey harvesting in July and August. We'll go through kind of what we've, what we recommend, what options are available to you. When it comes to treatments, we'll talk about those as well, kind of in the July, August timeframe. We'll start worrying a lot about Varroa and other things. So join the club. But I think John's slide was awesome. When it comes to beekeeping, it's barely the tip of the iceberg. The purpose of this series is to give you a little bit of a breadth of what's involved in beekeeping, because a lot of people say, ooh, I want to get bees. Okay, well, here's the breadth of things that you need to think about and to consider. And we want to expose you to those things and encourage you to learn more. Encourage you to come to the meetings, because we typically have, it's not me talking, it's not always John either. We have different speakers from around the region. We typically have 2 different topics each Monday meeting. And we try to have something for new beekeepers and something of just general interest to beekeeping overall. So I'm going to run through honey harvesting really quick because, come on, you got to have some honey. And basically, you've got three main options. You can extract, you can crush and strain, and then there's cut comb or chunk honey. Probably won't go into that much tonight, but the crush and strain, so many people do that. Extractor, it's a big, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a bit of an operation. You need, a couple of frames worth of honey to make that make sense for you. We do have extractors available through the club. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but don't be afraid to extract some honey. And I'll show you some clearing supers. I mean, the first thing you got to do is you got to get the bees off the frames, because the bees are going to be all in your frames. So how do you get them off? Well, you've got 3 options. You've kind of got fume boards, what a lot of people use, which are just these felt boards. And you've got this bee escape, which is a mechanical device that you install in your hive below the honey supers, above the brood nests. And it's a basically one-way valve for bees. So the bees move down into the hive or out of the hive, to relieve themselves or to go forage, and they can't get back in. So you leave that in the hive for a couple days and you come back and voila, they're all magically gone. Use your smoker. Here's my advice. When you're using a smoker and you're harvesting honey, don't overdo it, because you can't overdo it. You don't want your honey to come out tasting like smoke. Trust me, it happens. When you're using fume boards, there's a number of different products that you spray on that fume board that drives the bees out. That's what the fume board does. And it just they don't like the smell, so they leave. There's a number of commercial products available. I kind of highlighted one that I like, but I always encourage people, just be sure you're sticking with food-safe ingredients. And, was it Honey Robber? Oh, this one, yeah. Smells like vomit. So some of this stuff is, is pretty stout and pretty strong. Bees don't like it, but you won't either. But just, you know, do your research, see what your options are. Basically, just put the fume board, you know, you spray your product on the fume board, you put it on the top of your hive, give it 5-10 minutes. You've pushed all the bees out, good to go. With the escape board, as I mentioned, you just install that above your brood nest and, you know, wait 24 to 48 hours and you can remove the supers. You've eliminated the bees from that section. Manual, you know, that's basically you just take the honey frame out of the box, shake off the bees that are on there, use your brush. Here's a pro tip. Once you've cleared all the bees from that frame, put it in something very tight. Voice of experience. If you've got a crack in there, the bees will find it. So you've cleared all these frames and you've got them all nice and stacked in there, and then you go and to pick it up and you find it all covered with bees again. Because typically you're doing this in July, August. They're looking for honey, and they're going to find those frames sitting in a container that's not airtight. And that is exactly what it looks like. Because no matter what method you use, whether it be a fume board or a skateboard, there's going to be stragglers. And what a lot of us do, including myself, I get a leaf blower, turn that up on edge, and you know, I wouldn't go that close with that particular type of a leaf blower. You're going to rip a lot of little legs off and everything. But I have a little electric one that I put on low and I blow them out. So encourage the bees to go away. But that's when you're doing an entire box at a time. And you're probably not going to be doing that your first year, and you might get into it your second year. Sort your frames. When you're doing that, as John mentioned, you know, you're looking for things that are mostly capped. You know, if it's less than 75% capped, it's probably not a good candidate for extracting to try and get that honey, because this is uncured honey. The moisture content's too high, and you run the risk of all that honey fermenting once you've extracted it. So some people, again, we go over tips and tricks in our monthly meetings, but as a general rule, if you can turn that frame upside down and give it a shake and nothing comes out, some beekeepers will say they're good to go. That means it's thick enough. If you shake it and you get drops of honey or nectar falling onto the top, it's too wet, don't try to extract it. You're going to introduce too much moisture to the result, to your product. Once you do get all the bees cleared, I always encourage people, bag them. It does two things. It controls the honey, because there's going to be honey everywhere. No matter how careful you are with these, you're going to crack some cells. There's going to be honey dripping off these things. Get them wrapped up, get them covered up, at least to contain the mess, if nothing else. But also, you want to keep the bees out, some pest protection. Definitely don't want to leave this stack laying outside for any length of time. You want to get that stored somewhere away where the bees can't find it, and they will find it. Usually in July, August, there's not much nectar out there. They're looking for anything. When there is honey in the air, there is going to be bees a-coming. Select a harvesting location, wherever you can make it work. Just be sure, well, two things. The honey flows best when it's nice and warm. Beekeepers, on the other hand, flow best when it's not quite so warm. So if you have a place to do it where it's 85, 90 degrees, the honey's going to flow great. The honey's going to flow nice and smooth. The beekeepers might get a little hot, but, and remember, when there's honey in the air, the bees will find it. So what some people do is they'll put a fan blowing out in a window in the room that they're messing with the frames and trying to extract their honey. Because if you don't, anybody that opens that door, the bees are going to be out there smelling it. They're going to smell that honey. And every time you open the door, you're going to get bees in wherever you are. So keep that in mind when you're selecting a place to do your extraction. Yeah, everything's going to get sticky. Extractors, I always discourage people from investing in this kind of equipment. You're talking, for one of these manual jobs these days, John, $800, $900, even for a man.
At least 500 for a tiny one.
Yeah, for a little four-framer or something. One of these, you know, this will run you $1,300, $1,400 for a nice motorized version. The club has some extractors that we loan out. They're manual extractors. It's not that bad, especially if you're only doing a couple of boxes of honey. Borrow the clubs, figure out what works for you, figure out what kind of extractor might make sense for you. You may not need an extractor. I kept bees and extracted honey for, I'd say, close to 10 years. I never used an extractor. I was strictly crush and strain. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to have all this equipment. But I do want to cover extractors real quick because you might see one on Marketplace or you might see one cheap online. The big thing, there's two types of extractors. One's tangential and one's radial. Tangential means each frame goes in there sideways, oops, and you crank this thing and it slings the honey from this side only out against the edge, and then it flows down from the extractor. Then you have to stop, take that frame out, turn it around, and stick it back in. The radial, on the other hand, you stack them in there this way, and then as you spin, since the comb is oriented this direction, all the honey flows out. So it's a little more efficient, a little easier to use, overall takes less time. These you'll find are less expensive, and there's a reason. So, but could you not? I've seen guys with a 5-gallon bucket, some creative PVC work, and a cordless drill, and they made their own, and they work. So again, don't let me discourage anybody from DIYing this on YouTube, especially if you're doing small batches. You can experiment, see what works for you. But if you are, I just always like to tell people the two main types. Some people look on Facebook Marketplace or somewhere and find a cheap one, and they think they found something, and what they're finding is an old tangential one, or they see one online really cheap, and accordingly. Uncapping, tools of the trade. You've got capping knives and forks and rollers and heated knives for slicing the caps off. And this is really what that looks like. These are, you're using a knife just to slice the cappings off. This is if you're going to extract. Same thing here. You're using that little fork to kind of lift the cappings off of the frames as you go. And this little roller, some people really love. You roll that across, and the little spikes on the roller just punctures the cappings so that when you do start the extraction, gives them time to flow out. Depending on which of these methods you use, the amount of time you have to spend will vary. So if you're just poking little holes in the tops, it'll take a little longer than if you're slicing that off. So again, it's figuring out what works best for you. You ask 3 beekeepers, they're going to give you 5 different opinions about how to do this. So everybody's got their favorite. You'll figure out what works for you. Uncapping tank, when you go to slicing that stuff off, you want all those cappings to go somewhere, to fall somewhere. You can invest in a fancy capping tank, which all of the cappings fall into this tank, and then you've got a honey gate down here where you can just, open the tap and let whatever residual honey is in those cappings flow out. Some people use a bucket with a paint strainer in it for all the cappings to fall into. And then the honey can flow out of that paint strainer, and you can catch it. This is another kind of commercial tank. This is what I use at my house. It's a amazing piece of engineering, which is just some 2x4s. There's some nails sticking up here so I can stick the frame on it so that when we're working it, we got something to pivot on, and then a plastic bucket, one of those under the bed kind of Tupperware things to catch everything. And then I'm going to dump that into a bucket later. But from a capping standpoint, you don't have to get fancy. These molded plastic things, you can get those online for $9 or $10. They work good too, go over a 5-gallon bucket. If you've got 2 or 3 hives, this may be all you need, or all you want to mess with. Keep the weight balanced. You start spinning, it'll start trying to rock on you, but as you go and as some of that honey starts getting slung around, things will even out a little bit. Obviously, what we're doing here is straining the honey. The honey is coming out of the extractors, a lot of debris and and wax in here. You're going through a strainer into a bucket. The bucket's got a honey gate that we'll use to bottle it with. Always good to have 2 buckets so that you can keep going with your extraction while somebody's, filling bottles with this. And you have to scrape that out as needed. Oh. 1 pound of honey is about 12 ounces, so you'll see a lot of honey sold by the pound. You know, a mason jar is about 16 ounces, so it's a little more than a pound, so no big deal. Apparently this guy needed a lot of supervision, bottling, so that's why that's there. Cappings treat like honey, as I said. Again, if you're doing crush and strain, again, if extractors and leaf blowers and all that stuff, if you go out to your hive and pull out 3 frames your first year and just scrape them off, scrape everything off of there, I'll show you that in a minute. But crush and strain, you just take a spatula like this. In fact, we did this year with some frames. I mentioned I did this for 10 years, but you just scrape it all off into a bucket with a spatula or a putty knife. You get it into a bucket, basically, and then you get in there with your hands and you just break it. Make sure you break it up. This is my daughter. We're doing crush and strain. These are all the frames I'd cut the honey out of. This is the bucket we cut it into, and then we just get in there kind of elbows deep, just break it, making sure we're squishing up all that comb to break up the comb. Avoid power tools, trust me, voice of experience. You think, well, I'll put a paint stirrer on the end of power drill and I'll stick it in that 5-gallon bucket and I'll break all that stuff up. Well, what you really did was just mix a lot of wax and air into your honey that you will struggle to get rid of later. So don't do that. That's kind of what you're left with. You get this big mush of honey and bee parts and stuff and wax, and you're just going to strain that. And again, you may not have a 5-gallon bucket full. You may have just a very small amount. But, this is a kitchen strainer. Make sure you've dedicated to this purpose because you're probably not going to be able to get all the wax out of it once you use it for straining honey. But if nothing else, do this. It doesn't have to be a huge operation. It doesn't have to be a big extractor, capping tanks, hot knives, all that business. Keep it simple. Keep it something that works for you, especially if you've got a couple of hives. You don't have to take a whole honey super off this year. You might take 3 frames, get some nice honey for yourself. Leave the rest for the bees, or that may be all that you've been able to accumulate. This is, as I mentioned, you've got all that big bucket full of crushed up honey. This is just a filter on top of a 5-gallon bucket. You just dump that in there, and what you're left with here is just the honey. If you are using the paint strainers, which I use, be sure and wash them beforehand. Those paint strainers, they're kind of made out of nylon, and they stink when you buy them at the hardware store, which is all we do. I just buy those 5-gallon paint, strainers from Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, Ace. Wash them with a little mild soap. Let them air out and dry. Clean, good to go. That's the only filtration I've ever used, besides the strainers you saw on the extractors. What you're left with, you had that big bucket of mush. You poured it through the paint strainer. Now you got this thing. There's a couple things you can do. You can take this, dump it out onto a tray, a big cookie sheet, take it outside, nowhere near your beehives, and leave it for a day or two. The bees will find it and will pick it clean. There will be fighting, there will be a frenzy, there will be a cloud of bees all over it. It'll be a bit of a mess. Every new beekeeper ought to put at least a little bit out one time just to see what it's like. It's not pretty. But the reason you don't want to do it anywhere near your hives is because it will incite robbing. They'll see that, they'll smell it, they'll get excited, they'll get aggressive, and now they're looking for anything. And if they find your hive and some honey, they'll start attacking it as well. So keep it under control. But what I do with these, I typically just rinse them out because I put these up in my attic, dripping for a day or two. It's nice and hot up there. everything's dripped out. There's still going to be some residual in here, and I just rinse it out under the sink, not the kitchen sink, my shop sink, because I'll get in trouble if I did that in the kitchen. But I take a boiling pot of water, turkey roaster or whatever you've got, drop that bag into it and boil that all off. The wax will float to the top. You boil it off, you pull the bag out, you take the bag, you throw it away. What's left is wax. Turn the heat off, come back the next day. That wax is all going to settle to the top. The water is going to be at the bottom, and you're going to lift these out. And you can rinse and repeat multiple times to get to the purity level that you want, or you can continue to filtrate. Again, lots of stuff online you can look at on different ways to render wax. I'm not going to cover cut comb. You do need these kind of special frames to do cut comb. Basically, it's a foundationless frame. You let the bees make their own comb. And again, we'll talk about that during our monthly meetings. If you're interested in foundationless beekeeping, know that it's a little bit different and there's some very specific considerations. So if you're thinking about going foundationless and you're starting out, which I don't typically recommend, but if you do, be sure you research that online and get the ins and outs. Cleanup, again, I don't recommend this. And yes, this is an extractor I used one year, and this is what happened when I left the extractor out for the bees to clean up. I thought, well, there's all this sticky honey everywhere, I'll let the bees have it. Majority, I would say, of these bees are dead because they will fight to the death trying to collect that honey. So most of these bees didn't make it. A lot of them did, but again, I incited a lot of robin, and you'll do the same thing if you stack them up like this. What I always recommend, take your frames, wet frames, put them back in the honey supers and put them back on the hive. Leave them for 24 hours, 48 hours, they'll clean them. You'd be amazed how clean they'll get them. There will be nothing sticky left on those frames, and I mean nothing, because they'll get them that clean. Pro tip, assume every honey gate leaks, because it will. I've seen people put those, they put them up somewhere, and they've got a honey gate on it, and they put it in the back of their pantry or something. They come back, and there's this big puddle, and the ants have all found it, and it's a big, huge mess. So enjoy your sweet reward. I know I covered that quick. Come back to a bee meeting sometime. Eric, you want to talk to us a little bit about mentoring? It is 7:30, but I still want people to hear from you because you are important. Yeah, we're going to wrap this up. We'll have as quick a Q&A as we can. This is Eric Heil, by the way.
All right. So my job was, I'm a second-year beekeeper. My job is to tell you from a non-expert. I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. I like the iceberg picture. The greatest day, 2 years ago, went to a bee meeting, sat through 3 classes and knew everything. And got my bees, got my gear, brought them all home and quickly realized I didn't know anything at all. And so quickly proceeded to lose a hive within the first 3 weeks. Didn't know why. Started reading everything online, watching YouTube. And YouTube's great, but they're all perfect. And even some of the experts in our club, they'll tell you exactly what to do. And those guys have never lost a hive. What they don't tell you is, oh yeah, we lose hives every year, 2 or 3 of them. And I'm like, well, that would have been good to know when I first started, not when I was pulling my hair out and freaking out. So I'm not going to go through a lot of detail, but here's what I have learned. Number one, most importantly, expect false starts. You're going to have problems your first year, your second year, your third year. And all the research you look at, sometimes you never do figure out what exactly was the problem. Anyway, yeah, you're going to have problems, expect it. Number 2, mentor. The Bee Club has this mentor program. It's fabulous. And whether it's part of the Bee Club, find somebody else who keeps bees. Because the issue is, online you saw those pretty, this is what brood should look like. Well, it doesn't. Is that a problem? Do I have a problem? Are they all going to die? And you don't know. It's so easy to find somebody you can talk to, and they'll say, oh yeah, don't worry about it, or no, that may be a problem, let me come over and look. And having that relationship with somebody, once again, the Bee Club has a great mentor program, highly advised, get involved in that. But, even as we heard today, you get beetles. Well, how many's too many? Don't over smoke. What does that mean? Is 1 puff good enough, or is that 5 puffs? You don't know until you get with somebody to help you understand. Start with 2 hives, because you may kill one the first year and you're depressed. When I picked up my first 2 nukes, the lady behind me was like, well, this is the 3rd year in a row I'm going to try it. And once again, had picked up 1 nuke, and like I said, I killed mine in the first month. And not that it's that hard, it's just things happen. People ask me, why do you do it? Fun, adventure, and wanted some honey. And my mentor said, no, you have to have goals. I said, okay, I want to have a lot of fun, a lot of honey, and a lot of adventure. Didn't know what I wanted, and still, it has been a lot of fun. Yeah, swarms. I quickly found out after the first year of losing 2 hives, and I ended up getting another one for free. Swarms are cheap, and they're pretty easy, and they're pretty fun. To put up a swarm trap or 2. I ended up putting up 2 swarm traps and trying to take one out of a guy's, fortunately a good friend's house. And next thing I knew, I had 4 different swarms, and now I've got a bunch of bees and no equipment to put it in, and that's a whole different, but that was part of the fun. Getting stung. You know what, I was trying to think of a good piece of that. No one wants to get stung, and you start out and you have your suit and you don't get stung. First year, I never got stung. And you start watching these people on YouTube where they don't wear anything and it's all great. Well, they don't say, well, that's in the middle of the honey flow and the bees don't care about you. So you go out there in July with no suit on, or you got a hole in your pants leg or something. Next thing you know, you got stung 4 times. If you do it like you did it the first day, you'll never get stung. But you won't. You get used to it, you start having fun, and you're just gonna run out and peek in, and then one zaps you, and you're like, all I wanted to do was just to see. He said, peek in the top real quick. So it'll happen unless you're ultra careful, and then it won't happen. Monday bee meetings, they meet once a month, well worth your time. Order bees now, and you will kill bees. And people, even as I've kind of helped people, I don't want to kill any bee. There are 50,000 of them in there. And sometimes when you're putting that box on, you're going to squish 1 or 2. It's not the end of the world. There are 49,998, left in there or whatever. So don't freak out about that. Order bees now. But that was just a very quick of things off the top of my head of, what I've learned. It's a blast. It really is, and it's worth it when you get that first thing of honey and you get your own honey, and it's amazing. It's like cooking your own meals. When I was in college, first time I cooked my own meal. It's so much better when it's your honey. It's amazing, and it's fun to sit there and watch bees. I find myself doing that too sometimes. My wife was like, nobody does that. And she was like, well, even today, she's like, what were you doing back there for an hour? I just checking out the bees and seeing what they were doing. So great hobby, a lot of fun, and mentor program, bee meetings. And order your bees.
Thanks, Eric. If you're interested in a mentorship program, we do have applications and some guidelines out here on a sheet of paper and the table out here. Numbers are limited. The number of mentors is limited. That program is awesome. So if you're really interested, pick up a sheet. To Eric's point, find somebody you know that keeps bees. Having somebody available really counts. Join the club. We meet the second Monday of each month at the County Extension Office. We do regional presenters, hopefully 2 a month. Always open to the public, so you don't have to be a member. We want you to be a member, but you don't have to be. Be a keeper. Thank you all for sitting through this, but we do have time for, we have like 5 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question, or bring your questions to a monthly meeting. As Eric said, the important thing to do is get your equipment ordered this winter and get your bees ordered this winter. And we do have a question, and all our speakers are still here, so.
Do you have, what are your resources for purchasing bees?
We, as a club, will publish a list of local providers, and that'll be available on our website. We're working on that list as we speak. We have a number of providers in the area. Yeah. So we will get that information up to you. We, from the club, don't actually do a group order. We may do that in the future. We used to do it in the past, but we haven't done it for the last few years because there are good local suppliers.
How far from the hives do you want to put the leftover cappings? And does it help if you spread it out like 50 or 70 yards?
Oof. Guys?
I try to keep the, when I put the wet supers out, I try to keep them about 20 feet, 25 feet from the hives. If you put them right next to the hives, they'll lick them clean, and then they'll turn around and start robbing out the weakest hive because they're just associating that location with free honey.
So 20 feet is good?
Yeah, 20 feet is usually good, and it doesn't take them long to find it.
He's more aggressive than I am. I've gotten to where if I'm gonna do that, I throw them in my truck and I go down the road.
You can do that, then you're feeding somebody else's bees. You can also just take the lid off your hive and stack them right back on top above the inner cover. They'll move up and lick them clean and take it right back down if you don't want to worry about inciting everybody else's bees.
That's what I'd recommend.
And then if you have plastic honeycomb infrastructure, is it possible to do crush?
Mm-hmm. You just scrape it off the plastic.
Okay. I didn't know if
Into
it
a
got
bucket.
stuck in the holes.
No, just scrape it right off and take those wet supers and hang them back out. They'll pick them clean, and then they've got a little wax on that foundation to start next year with. Yes, sir.
I've got a couple of questions. What is the best and worst times of the year to start a hive?
Ooh.
Best time of the year is probably around mid-April to late April is the earliest you can get bees, but the earlier you can get them, let them take advantage of all the spring flowers. The worst time would be, you know, any late summer to fall to winter when there's no flowers around.
If you're ordering bees, how long would it typically take once you place an order for you to receive them?
You want to order your bees probably in January or February if you can, so that you can get on a list. You know, they can only produce a finite number. They still won't be able to deliver them until mid to end of April, but you want to be able to reserve yours early. You may have to put down a deposit too.
Yeah, they'll have a delivery list, and which will vary. So they'll say, okay, you know, you're buying for the April 15th batch that they have, or the end of April batch. So you'll have to kind of.
You can still start bees in, you know, the end of May, but you may have to wind up feeding them a lot of syrup just to get them to be able to draw out all the combs they need.
My second question is, you mentioned the bees can swarm out of your hive, and the queen might leave and take 2/3 of the bees with her. What happens to the bees that are left that don't go anywhere?
So a swarm happens when the population in the hive is very large and the old queen leaves, but not until they start a queen cell. They've got a new queen growing. Right before she's ready to emerge, typically, is when the old one leaves. So they're not in competition with each other.
You have like 5 of those peanut queen pods, and you like divvy them up into 5 different hives.
If you've got a hive that's raising multiple queens, yes, you can divvy them up and you can start multiple splits.
But each queen has to have a minimum number of bees.
Each queen needs a minimum number of bees to take care of her. Yeah, big queen breeders, they'll create very tiny, call them baby nukes, just to nurture that queen and get started. But if you want to build it up into a sizable hive, give them more bees and more resources to get them started.
Thank you. Oh,
If you got time.
yeah, real quick. Got to be a quick one.
So last week you said that a hive would cover roughly a 2-mile radius to search for pollen
2
nectar.
to 3 miles. But
Okay.
yeah.
So if you have multiple hives beside each other, are they all competing in that area?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
They may be, in fact, but you're not going to create that much. With 2 or 3 hives, you're not going to. Now, if you're putting 100 hives in a single yard and there's not much around, they could be competing against each other. But 2 or 3 hives isn't going to
They
make
are
a
in
difference.
competition, but you think about it, that's a 3-mile radius is like 18,000 acres. So there's should be plenty of resources out there.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks to the library for putting up with us for these 2 days and the partnership. We really appreciate it. It's a beautiful space. Thank you, Leah. Thank you for the staff. John, thank you, sir.